Jared Collins had always chased the thrill of forgotten places, and when he and his best friend Leela Monroe stumbled upon the crumbling Ravel estate, curiosity outweighed fear. The moment they stepped onto the cracked stone path, an icy wind wrapped around them like a warning, whispering secrets they couldn't yet understand. Shadows flickered in the broken windows, and the faint scent of something metallic lingered in the air, but Jared felt a pull he couldn't resist. Lila hesitated, sensing the danger, but the house seemed alive, and before either of them realized it, they had crossed a threshold from which there might be no return. I had always been drawn to old places, the kind of houses that looked like they had been abandoned by time itself. There was something magnetic about them, a silent promise that secrets waited inside for anyone brave or foolish enough to enter. When I first saw the Ravel estate, it was as if it had been placed there for me alone. The mansion stood at the end of a cracked, winding road, half hidden by trees whose branches twisted like gnarled fingers. Its windows were broken and dark, the roof sagging in places, as if it were tired of holding itself up. Yet there was a pull I couldn't resist. The moment my eyes fell on it, a shiver ran down my spine, one that made the hair on my arms stand on end, and still, I felt compelled to get closer. As I stepped onto the gravel path, the crunch of stones underfoot sounded unnaturally loud in the stillness around me. The air itself felt heavy, almost thick, as if the atmosphere inside the Ravel estate pressed against the skin. I imagined the stories that could hide in its shadows, families who vanished without a trace, servants who had whispered of strange sounds at night, or perhaps more sinister things that didn't like to be seen. Even the birds avoided this place. The trees were quiet except for the occasional creak as the wind brushed past. The front door was a massive rotting thing of dark wood. Its paint had peeled away years ago, and the iron handle was cold, rusted, and rough against my hand. When I pushed it open, it let out a long, low groan, like the house itself was sighing, warning me to stay away. Dust rose from the floor in small clouds, and I could see footprints from decades ago pressed faintly into it. Faded portraits hung crookedly on the walls, the people in them staring at me with eyes that seemed to follow every movement. Some of the faces were cracked, their features distorted like they were screaming silently. I told myself it was just my imagination, but my stomach tightened, and I felt a cold weight settle in my chest. Every room I entered was colder than the last. Shadows seemed to move without a source, stretching long and jagged across the walls. I tried to listen to the house, to understand its rhythm, but the only sound was my own breathing, heavy and uneven. As I moved down a long corridor, I noticed faint scratches along the wooden banister. They were deep, jagged, and claw-like, as if someone or something had tried to climb the stairs with unnatural strength. My pulse quickened, and for a moment I debated turning back. But curiosity pushed me forward, deeper into the house's waiting arms. Then I heard a soft, wet tapping. At first I thought it was the house settling, but the sound was deliberate, rhythmic, like fingernails drumming lightly against wood. I froze. The sound wasn't coming from above or below, it came from inside the walls themselves. My heart hammered in my chest as I pressed my ear to the peeling wallpaper, straining to hear, and then I realized it wasn't just tapping, it was whispering. The whispers were low and almost inaudible, words curling in a language I didn't recognize, twisting around each other like smoke. My stomach churned. When I tried to leave the room, the door I had entered through was gone. In its place, there was only a solid wall, smooth and unyielding. My hands pressed against it, hoping it was some trick of the light, but it didn't budge. And then I noticed a stain spreading across the wall, a deep, dark red that pulsed slowly, almost like a heartbeat. My skin crawled. The color was fresh, wet in appearance, but there was no source, no blood to be found anywhere else. It moved, small ripples across its surface, and I felt as though it was alive, watching me, breathing with a life of its own. The house seemed to respond to my fear. Every creak, every groan of timber, every whispering shadow pressed closer. My own heartbeat sounded deafening in my ears, a warning I couldn't heed. Something was here, something ancient and patient, and it was aware of me. I could feel it in the way the floorboards shifted slightly under my feet, in the faint brush of cold air that never came from an open window. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. I wanted to run, but I didn't know where to go. As I stood there paralyzed, I realized that I was no longer alone. From the corner of my vision, a shadow moved independently, flickering along the walls with a fluid, unnatural grace. The air thickened, pressing against me, and I could hear faint whispers mingling with the soft drip of something wet somewhere deeper in the house. My stomach turned to ice as a single thought consumed me. I wasn't visiting the Ravel estate. I had entered it, and it had entered me. I moved through the house as if in a dream, each step hesitant, my mind screaming at me to turn back, to escape, but my feet refused to obey. Every hallway seemed longer than it should be, the walls bending in ways that made no sense, as if the house itself were alive, folding and twisting around me. The air was thick, pressing against my chest, and the faint metallic scent that had haunted the first rooms grew stronger, mingling with the stench of decay. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, forming shapes that shifted when I looked away, only to snap back into place when I glanced again. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things. I told myself the scratching on the walls, the rhythmic tapping, the whispers were all tricks of the mind, fueled by fear and exhaustion. But as I walked, I noticed more details that could not be dismissed. Footprints appeared in the dust, small and irregular, moving ahead of me and then vanishing as if the house had swallowed them. Symbols were etched into the floorboards and walls, jagged and almost alive, twisting into patterns that made my head spin when I stared too long. I felt watched, followed, and I knew I was not alone. In the dining room, covered in layers of white sheets, I saw it. A hand protruded from under one of the sheets, twisted in a way that made me gasp. It was pale, almost translucent, with fingers bent at impossible angles. I stepped closer despite the fear, my heart hammering in my chest, and the hand twitched, jerking back under the sheet as though alive. I stumbled backward, and the sheet fell still, but I could feel the eyes of the house on me, cold and hungry. Every door I tried opened to the same empty, twisting hallways. I began to realize the house did not want me to leave. It wanted something from me, though I did not yet understand what. The whispering grew louder, more urgent, filling the rooms and crawling along the floorboards, wrapping around my mind. I tried to cover my ears, but the sound seemed to come from inside me, echoing in my skull, growing more insistent with every step. Then I noticed a door I had not seen before. It was slightly ajar, and a faint red light spilled through the crack. A part of me screamed to turn back, to leave the house before it was too late. But something stronger, darker, pushed me forward, compelling me toward the light. My hands trembled as I reached for the handle. The moment I touched it, the light vanished, and the darkness of the room swallowed me. I could no longer see my hands in front of me. The air was cold, wet, thick, as if I was standing under water. I felt something brush against my ankle. I froze, every nerve screaming. But it was soft and sticky, like a hand made of wet clay. Panic surged, and I stumbled backward, my foot catching on a loose floorboard. I fell hard, the impact reverberating through my body, but I did not have time to recover. Shadows shifted at the edge of my vision, and I realized I was surrounded, hundreds of them, moving just out of sight, crawling, reaching, whispering. In the faint glow of the red light that returned briefly, I saw something crouched at the far end of the room, its head tilted unnaturally, at an impossible angle, and I could see its mouth opening wide, jagged teeth glinting in the half-light. It did not speak, not aloud, but inside my mind, a voice slithered in, cold and patient. "You cannot leave. You belong here now." I tried to scream, but my voice was caught in my throat. I scrambled to my feet and ran blindly down a hallway that stretched farther than it should have. The walls seemingly breathing, pulsating with a life of their own. The whispers followed, filling my ears with words I could not understand, the syllables sharp and slicing, carving into my mind. I realized with terror that the house was learning me, tracking my fear, feeding off it, shaping itself to trap me. When I stumbled into the next room, I found it empty, seemingly peaceful for a moment, but the calm was worse than the terror. The walls glistened as if wet, and the floor beneath me seemed soft, almost spongy. I stepped carefully, but the floor shifted under my weight, and I felt the strange pulse of something living below the surface. A faint dripping echoed from the ceiling, slow and deliberate, and when I looked up, the shadows formed shapes of hands, hundreds of them, reaching downward, grasping at me. And then I saw it. Another door, small and low to the ground, red light spilling faintly from its crack. But this door was different. The wood itself seemed to breathe, the grain moving like veins. I knew instinctively that whatever lay beyond it was alive, aware, and waiting. My stomach twisted as I realized I had no choice. I had to see it, or I would never leave this place. The whispers surged into a deafening roar, and I felt the wet, cold fingers wrap around my ankles. I took a trembling breath and pushed the door open. I fell into the basement, the impact jarring my body and rattling my mind. Pain shot through my shoulder, but I barely registered it. I was too consumed by the darkness, the smell, the presence that seemed to reach for me from every corner. The room was dimly lit by a faint, sickly yellow glow, coming from no source I could see. Shadows clung to the walls like living things, stretching and twisting into shapes that suggested movement, though nothing moved when I blinked. The air was thick with the metallic temps of blood, or perhaps rust, and a decay that made my stomach churn. I staggered to my feet, pressing my back to the wall, and tried to orient myself. The basement was small but filled with shelves, jars, and containers, all dusty and old, yet something about them felt alive. On each shelf, dozens of jars were lined up, glass glinting in the faint light. I froze when I looked closer inside. Each jar was a face, small, twisted, frozen in an expression of pure terror. Some had eyes wide open, staring at nothing, some mouths frozen in silent screams. I reached out, my hand shaking, and touched one jar. The face inside blinked wetly, and a black liquid oozed down the glass, coating my fingers. I recoiled, gagging, and the jar rattled as though the face inside were trying to pull itself free. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but I realized the basement door was gone. The walls had closed in, stretching impossibly far, twisting in a way that made the room feel like it was breathing. I could hear whispers now, low, urgent, surrounding me from all sides. They weren't speaking in words I could understand. They were feelings, memories, fears. They pierced my mind, carving dread into every corner. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound seemed to echo inside me, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. Then I noticed movement along the edges of the basement. Shadows flickered, and I saw shapes. Human-like but wrong, limbs bent at impossible angles, bodies too thin, faces stretched into grins that were all teeth. They didn't advance. They waited, watching me, crouching in the corners like predators. Panic surged, but I forced myself to breathe, trying to focus on one thing, one path. I stumbled forward, but the floor beneath me shifted slightly with every step, almost soft, like it were breathing too. At the far end of the basement, I saw a figure crouched on the floor. My stomach turned to ice. Its head was tilted at an impossible angle, the skin pale and almost translucent. Its mouth opened wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth, blackened at the edges, glistening in the faint light. It did not move, but my mind knew it was aware of me. I froze, unable to breathe, unable to think. Then, in a voice that wasn't spoken aloud, it whispered directly inside my head, "You belong here." The words burned in my skull. I tried to scream, but no sound emerged. The whispers around me grew louder, rising to a deafening roar, yet I could still hear the singular voice inside me, patient, relentless. I turned, desperate to escape, and the shelves seemed to stretch endlessly, corridors forming between them that led nowhere. I ran blindly, weaving through the shelves, tripping over jars, sending them clattering to the ground. Faces stared back at me, some melting into black liquid, some pressing against the glass as if trying to escape. The sound of cracking glass, wet slaps, and low, wet whispers filled the room. My hands caught on something, a rope, a pipe, a railing. I didn't know, but I grabbed it, using it to steady myself. Shadows flitted along the edges of my vision, always just beyond reach, always watching. Then I realized the basement was changing. The walls shifted, stretching upward, impossibly high, the ceiling vanishing into darkness. The shelves warped and warped again, twisting like the house itself were alive, reshaping itself around me, trapping me. Every jar I passed seemed to stare harder, the faces inside pressing forward as though they could feel my fear. And then I noticed that a door at the far end, barely visible, red light spilling from its crack. My body froze, but I could feel it calling me, beckoning. Something deep inside knew I had no choice. I had to go through it. I took a trembling step toward it, and the whispering intensified. Voices now overlapping, chanting my name, surrounding me, pressing into me. Wet, cold fingers brushed against my arms and legs, grasping, tugging, trying to hold me back. I shivered violently, panic clawing at my throat. I reached the door and pressed my hand against it. The red light pulsed once, twice, like a heartbeat, and I felt a wet, sticky sensation run up my arm. I swallowed hard, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin, and then I pushed the door open. The moment I crossed the threshold, the basement and everything inside it vanished. Darkness gave way to another room, and yet the feeling of being watched, of something alive and patient, remained. I knew, deep in my bones, that the house was far from done with me. I don't know how long I wandered after that. Time seemed meaningless in the Ravel estate, each moment stretching and folding into the next, like the walls themselves were twisting reality around me. Every room I entered was a warped version of itself, familiar yet grotesque. A dining table sagged under the weight of rotting food, the smell making me gag, while chandeliers dripped a dark viscous liquid that pooled on the floor like blood. Mirrors reflected not my own face, but someone else's, hollow-eyed, pale, twisted in silent terror. I tried to avert my gaze, but something compelled me to look deeper, to see what I could not understand, and each time the reflection moved independently, its grin widening with each heartbeat. I began to notice patterns, subtle and horrifying. Each room seemed to hold remnants of lives, clothes folded or scattered, toys lying where children might have left them, photographs perched on shelves or stuck to walls. But every object was broken or warped, corrupted, as though the house itself had eaten the souls of those who had once occupied them. I could feel the house watching, learning, feeding on the smallest tremor of fear in my chest. My pulse quickened with every step, but the thought of turning back was impossible. The hallways stretched endlessly, each turn leading me to new horrors, or looping me back to the same room with the red-stained walls, as if the house refused to let me escape. In a small bedroom I noticed something that made my stomach drop. A diary lay on the floor, its cover cracked and worn. I picked it up with trembling hands, flipping it open to the first page. The handwriting was frantic, the ink smudged, as if whoever had written it had been shaking with terror. The words ran in jagged lines. "They know I am here. They are inside the walls. They will never let me go. I hear them breathing, whispering, waiting." As I turned the pages, the entries became more erratic, chaotic, almost incomprehensible, until the last page ended abruptly. Mid-sentence a thick, dark stain spread across it, and the ink had been smeared into a crude, twisted smiley face. My hands shook violently, and I dropped the diary, the pages fluttering to the floor like lifeless wings. I felt the presence again, stronger now, pressing down on me from all directions. The soft tapping, once distant, was now all around me, coming from inside the walls, the floor, even my own chest. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the sound penetrated, rattling my thoughts and gnawing at my sanity. Every instinct screamed to run, but the hallways had changed again. Doors I had passed were gone, replaced by walls. Shadows stretched across the floors and ceilings, crawling toward me, flickering and twisting with a life of their own. Then I saw Ita's small child crouched in the corner, skin pale and almost translucent, eyes black as night, mouth sewn shut with coarse thread. It didn't move, yet I could feel its gaze drilling into me. The shadows around it shifted, forming long thin fingers that reached outward, pointing at me, beckoning me forward. I stumbled back, heart hammering, and realized that the whispers had changed. They were no longer just words. They were thoughts, memories, fears. They burrowed into my mind, clawing at my deepest anxieties. I ran blindly through the twisting corridors, the house bending around me like a living thing. Every door I tried slammed shut before I could reach it, each room growing darker and colder. The walls breathing and pulsing like the house itself were alive. I felt the wet, sticky hands brush against my skin again, hundreds of them, trying to hold me, drag me into the walls. Every step I took was heavier, as if the floor itself resisted me, trying to trap me permanently in this nightmare. Finally, I stumbled into a room that felt different. The air was almost still, yet charged with a weight I couldn't explain. On the floor, a faint red glow emanated from cracks between the tiles. I bent down, peering closer, and realized the cracks were veins, spreading outward like a heartbeat frozen in time. From the corner of the room, a whisper slithered through my mind. "You are ours. You cannot leave." Panic rose, thick and suffocating. But before I could move, the child was there again, stepping closer, the sewn mouth twitching as if it wanted to speak but could not. The shadows followed, rising from the corners, crawling along the walls, reaching, grasping. The red glow in the floor pulsed once, twice, in rhythm with my racing heartbeat. I realized then, with a sickening clarity, that the house wasn't just watching me or trapping. MIT was feeding on me, shaping itself around my fear, turning every step into a deeper descent into madness. And then I understood the truth. There was no way out. Every corridor, every door, every shadow was part of it. The house had already claimed me, and the whispers promised that my torment had only just begun. The red glow from the floor spread, creeping toward me like a living thing, and I felt it crawl over my skin, cold and sticky. The child raised a hand, long thin fingers pointing directly at my chest, and the whispers grew into a chorus, chanting my name with hunger and malice. I realized then, in that unbearable moment, that the house was alive, and I was now its prey. I stumbled into a room that should not have existed. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, lost in shadow, and the walls were covered with thousands of eyes. They blinked in unison, unblinking in some moments, but always watching me. I could feel their gaze burrowing into my mind, pressing into my skull, probing my thoughts, my fears, my very soul. I tried to look away, to escape their attention, but every nerve in my body told me that moving was pointless. The house was alive, and it knew me better than I knew myself. In the center of the room, a single chair faced away from me. I approached cautiously, dread twisting my stomach. The floor beneath my feet felt unnaturally soft, like it was yielding, almost swallowing me, and the whispers surrounded me, louder now, urgent and pressing, chanting words I couldn't comprehend, crawling into my ears, my throat, my mind. I could feel every step as though the house itself were counting them, watching, waiting for me to falter. I drew closer to the chair, and my pulse accelerated, hammering in my ears. With a trembling hand I reached out and touched the back of the chair. It shifted slightly, as though it had been waiting for my touch. Then, with a movement so sudden it made me stumble backward, the figure slumped in the chair raised its head and I saw myself. My own face stared back at me, pale and hollow-eyed, a twisted, hollow echo of what I had once been. Its mouth curved into a grin that was not mine, and its eyes gleamed black, cold, and impossibly deep. I stumbled, unable to move, unable to breathe, my mind recoiling in terror. The eyes on the walls blinked faster, a synchronized rhythm like a heartbeat gone wrong, and I felt a presence behind me. A shadow, darker than darkness itself, moved closer, brushing against me, pressing into me, whispering things that I could not understand yet felt in every fiber of my being. I realized, with a creeping, icy horror, that I had never truly entered the house as myself. The house had been waiting, patient, feeding, learning. It had been shaping me, molding me, and the face in the chair was the final product, warning and a reflection of what I could become. Before I could react, the floor beneath me vanished. I fell into darkness so absolute it seemed to stretch forever. A void filled with the whispers of all those the house had taken before me. I landed hard on a surface that was soft and wet, and the smell of iron and decay filled my nose. I tried to rise, but the weight of the house pressed down, pinning me, and I could feel tiny, wet fingers crawling along my skin, pulling, tugging, dragging me deeper into something alive and ancient. Then, almost imperceptibly, the darkness gave way, and I found myself back in the Ravel estate as it had appeared from the outside. Normal, sunlit, almost inviting. My chest heaved with relief, and for a heartbeat, I thought I had escaped. The air smelled fresh, the gravel path outside was just gravel, and the house looked like nothing more than a forgotten ruin at the end of the road. Hope surged through me, and I stumbled toward the front door, desperate to leave this nightmare behind. But when I turned to glance at a mirror by the door, the relief drained from me. My reflection smiled not me but something else. Its eyes were black, endless voids, and the grin stretched far too wide across its pale face. I blinked, and the reflection's mouth moved, mouthing words I could not hear, words that reached straight into my mind. Welcome home. I spun around, heart hammering, expecting to see someone or something behind me, but the room was empty. The door was solid, locked, as if it had never been a door at all. I tried to open it, to force my way out, but it would not budge. Panic clawed at my chest, and I felt a familiar wet, cold sensation crawling up my legs and arms. The whispers returned, soft at first, then rising in volume, 1,000 voices chanting my name, echoing in unison, laughing without sound. And then I saw it. A shadow moving just beyond the edge of my vision, flickering like a memory I could not quite grasp. The house itself had followed me outside, had integrated into the world around me. I realized, with a terror that froze me to the bone, that I had not escaped at all. The house had claimed me. My reflection, my mind, my very essence trapped forever in its living, breathing walls. The sunlight that had seemed so comforting turned sickly and dim, and I understood the truth. The Ravel estate was patient. It waited, it hunted, and now it had found a new way to reach out, to pull me in, to make me part of its never-ending collection of fear. I fell to my knees, my ears ringing with the whispers, and I knew that this time there would be no door, no escape, no dawn, only the house, only the eyes, only the endless, eternal hunger. And somewhere, in the deepest shadows of the estate, a voice, my voice, whispered one last, horrifying promise. We are forever.